Every day, a desperate voice echoed through a busy avenue. "Somebody, get me out of here." It was the cry of a 7-year-old girl, abandoned in an alleyway between empty buildings, until a millionaire stopped his luxury car and, upon looking at her, was shocked. Those eyes were eerily familiar, a perfect replica of the eyes of the woman he loved and lost years ago. What he discovered next would forever change both of their destinies. Subscribe to the channel to receive stories that touch your heart. Every day, the air conditioning in the 40th floor office hummed with hypnotic rhythm, drowning out the chaos of the city below. The millionaire adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt as he analyzed charts representing millions of dollars in transactions. His mirrored mahogany desk reflected a life of material achievements: Swiss watches, gold pens, corporate trophies that gleamed under the cold LED lights. At 42, he had built a financial empire that few dared challenge. Luxury hotels, construction companies, international investments, his name was synonymous with relentless success. But behind the impeccable facade, there was a void that all the money in the world couldn't fill. He would wake up, work, close deals, sleep, and start all over again the next day, like an automaton dressed in Armani. The secretary knocked on the glass door. "Mr. Sterling, the meeting with the Japanese investors has been rescheduled for tomorrow at 9, she said, maintaining the respectful distance that all employees learned to keep. He simply nodded without taking his eyes off the documents. Across town, in a completely opposite reality, a 7-year-old girl woke up on an improvised mattress made of cardboard. The alleyway between two abandoned buildings downtown had been her world for months. The peeling walls dripped with constant moisture, and the smell of garbage mingled with the aroma of food from a distant restaurant, constantly reminding her of her hunger. She had learned to organize her small space with the precision of someone much older. A cut-off soda bottle served as a jar to store found crumbs. Pieces of cloth formed a pillow. A torn plastic tarp protected her house from the rain, creating a melancholic sound when the drops hit it. Her morning ritual always began the same way. She would get up, stretch her small arms to relieve the pain in her back, and walk to the entrance of the alley. There, she would position herself strategically where she knew her voice would reach, the busy avenue. Then she would take a deep breath and let out the cry that had become her trademark: "Somebody get me out of here." The voice, although weak from malnutrition, carried an emotional force that made some people slow down. But it was only a few seconds of hesitation before they resumed their affairs, pushing that uncomfortable reality away from their consciences. Executives in suits hurried by, whispering to each other about these social problems the government should solve. Well-dressed women averted their gaze, clutching their designer purses against their bodies. College students paused for a few moments, but were soon dragged away by their classmates. "There's no point in standing there. You can't save everyone." Meanwhile, high in his corporate building, the millionaire signed contracts that moved fortunes. Each signature represented more power, more influence, more detachment from the humanity he once possessed. He had learned early on that showing weakness or compassion was synonymous with failure in business. Feelings were luxuries that men like him couldn't afford. The girl, in turn, had developed an admirable survival routine for someone so young. She knew the schedules of the garbage collectors, knew which restaurants discarded still usable food, identified which passers-by were most likely to leave a few coins. But above all, she never stopped shouting. It was as if she knew instinctively that this was her only chance to be found by someone who really mattered. The hours passed slowly in the alley. The sun changed position, creating different patterns of light and shadow on the peeling walls. The girl watched these changes as if they were a natural calendar, marking the passage of time in a world that seemed to have forgotten her. Not far away, the millionaire ended another day of meetings, devoid of humanity. His subordinates greeted him with false reverence. His partners fawned over him seeking favors. His acquaintances sought him out, interested only in his social status. He had become accustomed to these superficial relationships, but something inside him screamed for authenticity, a silent scream that he stifled with work and ambition. As the day came to an end, both prepared for another night in their opposite worlds. He in his luxurious penthouse with panoramic views of the city, surrounded by expensive objects that brought no happiness. She in her makeshift shelter, dreaming of the day someone would finally hear her and respond to her desperate call. The morning started differently for the millionaire. An unexpected call from his personal lawyer forced him to cancel the morning meeting and head downtown to resolve an urgent matter related to an inherited property. As his private driver navigated through the dense traffic, he observed through the tinted window a reality he normally ignored. Street vendors fought for space on the sidewalks. Entire families slept under awnings. Children sold candy at traffic lights. It was a parallel world that existed just a few blocks from his office, but that he had learned not to see. His privileged education had taught him that these were complex systemic issues, problems distant from his personal responsibility. The black car with tinted windows glided through the streets like an isolating capsule, separating him from the raw reality of the outside world. He checked emails on the tablet, responded to messages from other businessmen, kept busy so he wouldn't have to confront the discomfort that this urban landscape provoked. In the alley, the girl had woken up earlier than usual. A strange feeling took over her small chest, a sense that this day would be different from the others. She organized her few belongings more carefully, as if preparing for something important. She had dreamed of a male voice calling her name, although she couldn't remember having heard her own name in a long time. She positioned herself at the entrance of the alley a little earlier than usual. The traffic on the avenue was still light, but she felt an inexplicable urgency to start her cries. She took a deep breath, filling her small lungs with morning air, and let out her usual plea. "Somebody get me out of here!" The voice echoed through the street with a different intensity, as if carrying all the hope accumulated during months of abandonment. Some pedestrians looked in the direction of the sound, but soon resumed their hurried walks. It was just another ordinary day in a city where the suffering of others had become an urban soundtrack. The driver slowed down as he approached a traffic light. Mr. Sterling looked up from the tablet, annoyed by the delay. It was then that he heard it, clear, piercing, impossible to ignore. "Somebody get me out of here." The cry cut through the artificial air conditioning of the vehicle like a sharp blade, hitting something deep in his chest that he thought had been dead for years. "Stop the car," he murmured, still processing what he had heard. "Sir?" The driver looked in the rearview mirror, confused. "I said stop the car." The voice came out louder than he intended, revealing an emotion he rarely showed. The vehicle pulled over to the curb. Mr. Sterling got out without waiting for the driver to open the door, something he never did. His Italian shoes touched the uneven asphalt of the street. His ears picked up the real noise of the city without the protection of the tinted glass. He remained still for a few seconds, trying to locate the origin of those words that had pierced all his emotional defenses. Then he heard it again, weaker now, almost a desperate whisper. "Somebody, get me out of here." He followed the sound like a hypnotized man, leaving behind the safety of his car and plunging into a world he had avoided all his life. His steps led him to the entrance of the alley, where he stopped abruptly. There, sitting on a piece of cardboard, was a girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The impact was instant and devastating. Those eyes, even framed by a dirty and thin face, were absolutely unmistakable. The almond shape, the greenish honey color, the way they rose slightly at the corners. It was like looking through time and seeing the face of the only woman he had ever truly loved. The girl watched him with curiosity, mixed with fear. She wasn't used to seeing men so well dressed in her territory. The impeccable suit, the silk tie, the watch that shone on his wrist, everything indicated that he belonged to a world completely different from hers. Are you okay?" was all he could ask, his voice choked with an emotion he couldn't name. She tilted her head, studying him with the precocious sagacity of someone who had learned to read people's intentions to survive. Did you hear my cry?" she asked, with a voice that tried to be strong but trembled with restrained hope. He nodded, unable to form words. The resemblance was disturbing, impossible to be a coincidence. Every feature of the child's face echoed memories he had buried deeply, memories of a woman he had met more than 8 years ago, whom he had loved intensely, but who had been forced to leave behind due to family and social pressures. "What's your name?" he managed to ask, crouching down to be at her height. "I don't know anymore," she replied with devastating honesty. "My mom used to call me my love, but she's not here anymore." His heart stopped for a moment. The pieces of a painful puzzle began to fit together in his mind, forming an image he wasn't prepared to face. But there was no turning back now. Destiny had conspired to put them face to face at that moment, and he knew that his life would never be the same. Mr. Sterling remained crouched in front of the girl for long minutes, fighting against a torrent of emotions that threatened to break down all the barriers he had built over the years. His rational mind screamed for him to walk away, get back in the car, resume his organized and predictable life, but his eyes couldn't stray from that face that was a cruel mirror of the past. "Sir, is everything all right?" The driver's voice sounded distant, coming from the sidewalk where the man waited. Clearly uncomfortable with the situation, he stood up abruptly, as if waking from a trance. Reality hit him like a punch. There he was, one of the most respected businessmen in the city, standing in a smelly alley talking to a street girl. What would people think? What would his partners say? How would this affect his carefully constructed image? I need to go," he murmured, more to himself than to her. The girl watched him walk away with an expression that mixed understanding and disappointment. She had seen that reaction before. Adults who approached driven by curiosity or pity, but who soon retreated when confronted with the raw reality of her situation. She had already learned not to nurture hopes. "Sir," she called when he was almost at the exit of the alley, Are you coming back?" He stopped, without turning around. The simple question carried immense weight. It wasn't just about him returning physically, but about him deciding whether to get involved or continue pretending she didn't exist. I don't know," he replied with brutal honesty. Back in the car, he tried to resume his normal routine. He opened the tablet, checked emails, made some business calls, but his mind insisted on returning to those eyes, to that fragile voice, asking if he would return. During the meeting with his lawyer, he had difficulty concentrating. The professional's words about deeds and documents sounded distant and irrelevant. "Sir, are you listening to me?" asked the lawyer, noticing his distraction. "Sorry, continue," he replied, forcing himself to pay attention. But part of his mind remained in that alley, questioning impossible coincidences and facing ghosts he preferred to keep buried. In the following days, he tried to maintain his usual routine, but found it impossible. He changed the route to the office, instructing the driver to avoid downtown. When that didn't work, when he could still mentally hear that desperate cry, he began to work exclusively from home, cancelling in-person meetings. His employees noticed the change. The secretary commented discreetly with colleagues about the boss's strange mood. His partners realized that he was less aggressive in negotiations, more distracted during video conferences. Some began to speculate about health problems or personal issues. Meanwhile, the girl continued her routine in the alley. But something had changed after the encounter. Her cries became less frequent, replaced by long periods of thoughtful silence. She kept watching the entrance of the alley, as if she expected the elegant figure to reappear. One morning, after a week of fruitless attempts to forget, Mr. Sterling couldn't resist any longer. He instructed the driver to pass by the street, just to check the traffic. Of course, it was a flimsy excuse. There were apps that showed traffic conditions in real time. As the car approached the alley, he lowered the window and waited. For a few minutes, there was only silence. Then, as if she had sensed his presence, the familiar voice echoed, "Somebody, get me out of here." But this time, there was something different in the tone, a note of hope that hadn't been there before. He closed his eyes, fighting against himself. His privileged upbringing, his business principles, his social reputation, all of that screamed for him to move on. But there was something deeper, a force he couldn't name or control, that pulled him towards that child. "Sir?" The driver noticed his hesitation. "Shall we proceed to the office?" The question hung in the air as he waged an internal battle. On one side, the safe and predictable life he had built. On the other, an emotional mystery that could shatter everything he had achieved. But by that point, he already knew there was no turning back. Some discoveries are inevitable, some encounters are predestined. "Stop the car again," he said, with a resignation that sounded almost like relief. "There's something I need to find out." This time, Mr. Sterling got out of the car with firmer steps, although his heart beat erratically. He had spent days trying to rationalize the encounter, seeking logical explanations for that disturbing resemblance. Maybe they were just common features, coincidences that his anxious mind had amplified, but deep down, he knew he was lying to himself. The girl was in the same place, as if she had never left. Seeing him, her eyes lit up with a cautious joy. "You came back," she said, more as a statement than a question. "I came back," he confirmed, surprising himself with his own honesty. Can I sit here with you?" She nodded, making space on the piece of cardboard that served as her makeshift throne. He hesitated at the sight of the seat, worried about his expensive suit, but then forced himself to sit down. The contrast was shocking, his impeccable clothes against the deteriorated environment, his well-groomed skin next to hers, marked by life on the streets. "Why did you come back?" she asked, with the direct curiosity of children. The question caught him off guard. How to explain that he couldn't stop thinking about her? How to admit that those eyes had destroyed his peace of mind? "You remind me of someone very important," he said finally. "Someone you lost." Her perception surprised him. "How do you know?" "Because you look sad when you look at me. It's the same way I feel when I think about my mom." The simplicity of the answer hit him like a punch to the stomach. She had identified in minutes something that had taken him years to admit to himself. That he carried a deep sadness, an unresolved grief for someone he had loved and lost. "Tell me about your mom," he asked, genuinely interested for the first time in a long time in someone else's story. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained firm. "She was very beautiful, you know. She had long hair that smelled like flowers, even when we didn't have good soap. She sang to me every night, even when she was very sick. She was sick for a long time, about 2 years. First it was just a cough, then she got very thin. The medicines were too expensive." The girl's voice faltered for a moment. "She always said that my father would find us one day, that he was an important man, that he just needed to know that I existed." His blood ran cold. She talked about your father?" "Sometimes. She said that they loved each other very much, but that his family wouldn't let them be together, that he didn't even know I was going to be born." The girl wiped away tears with her dirty hands. "She kept a picture of him, but we lost everything when we left the last place we lived. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together terrifyingly. In his mind, the dates, the circumstances, those unmistakable eyes. It was impossible, it had to be a coincidence. But his heart already knew the truth before his mind accepted it. What was your mother's name?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. "Elena Santos." The answer fell like a bomb on him. Did you know her?" He couldn't answer immediately. Elena, the woman who had been the love of his youth, the only person who had loved him for who he really was, not for what he possessed. Elena, who had disappeared from his life when his family discovered the relationship and exerted all their influence to separate them. Where is she now?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "In heaven," replied the girl with the sad wisdom of children who had faced losses too early. "It's been 3 months. She was hospitalized in the public hospital, but there was no way anymore." His world collapsed at that moment. Elena had died alone in a public hospital while he lived his life of luxury just a few miles away. And, worse, she had raised a daughter, possibly his, while he built financial empires unaware of her existence. "Sir, are you okay?" The concern in the girl's voice brought him back to the present. He looked at her, really looked, seeing beyond the dirt and the torn clothes. Elena's eyes, the shape of the face he had kissed 1,000 times in dreams, even the way she tilted her head when she was thoughtful. How had he been blind for so long? "Yes, I'm okay," he lied. "Listen, you can't keep living here. It's dangerous. You're too small." "I can take care of myself," she replied with wounded pride. "I've been living here alone for 3 months. But you shouldn't have to take care of yourself alone." He stood up, a new determination born in his chest. "I'm going to find a way to help you." She watched him with hope mixed with skepticism. "Do you promise you won't disappear again?" The simple question carried the weight of all the abandonments she had faced in life. He knelt down again in front of her, looking directly into her eyes, Eleanor's eyes. "I promise," he said, and for the first time in years, he truly meant a promise he made. In the following days, the millionaire found himself in a situation completely new to him, genuinely concerned about the well-being of another person. He returned to the alley daily, always with some business-related excuse to justify his presence downtown. He brought food, clean clothes, blankets, small gestures that meant the world to her. But that deeply stirred his own emotions. The girl, initially distrustful like any child who had learned to survive alone, began to open up gradually. She told stories about her mother, described the places where they had lived before, spoke about her simple dreams, having a real home, going back to school, having toys. Each conversation revealed more details that confirmed his suspicions about paternity. "My mom said my dad had honey-colored eyes, just like yours," she commented during one of his visits while devouring a sandwich he had brought. His heart raced. Did she describe what he was like? Sometimes. She said he was very smart, that he worked with important things, that he had a small scar here. She pointed to her own forehead, exactly where he had an almost imperceptible mark from a childhood fall. The evidence accumulated overwhelmingly, but he still struggled to accept the reality. Not because he didn't want a daughter. The idea, surprisingly, didn't scare him as much as it should. What terrified him was facing the implications. For 8 years, he had been a father without knowing it, while Elena raised a child who was part of him alone. Parallel to the emotional discoveries, the practical aspects of the situation began to complicate. His employees noticed his frequent absences, his mood swings, his distraction during important meetings. Whispers began to circulate around the company about possible personal problems of the CEO. The situation worsened when his secretary, concerned about his changes in behavior, discreetly hired a private investigator to find out what was going on. When the photos arrived, images of him sitting in the alley, talking to a street girl, the internal scandal was immediate. "Mr. Sterling, I need to speak with you urgently," said his legal counsel, entering his office with a grave expression. "What happened?" "There are rumors circulating about your recent activities downtown. Some members of the board are concerned about possible implications for the company's image." He felt anger rise in his chest. "My personal activities are nobody's business. With all due respect, sir, when you're a public figure like you, everything becomes a matter of image, especially when it involves an unaccompanied minor. People might misinterpret." "Misinterpret what?" His voice came out louder than he intended. "Helping a child in need is a crime now. It's not a crime, but it can be misconstrued. I suggest that if you want to help, do it through official channels. Donate to charities, sponsor social programs. But this direct contact—" He interrupted her with a gesture. "Thank you for your concern, but I can take care of my own life." But the problems were just beginning. The next day, when he arrived at the alley for his daily visit, he found the girl visibly frightened. "Sir, people came here today asking about you," she said, running into his arms as soon as she saw him. "What people?" "A woman in business clothes and a man with a camera. They asked a lot of questions about what you did here. If you gave me money, if you tried to take me somewhere." His anger exploded. "Journalists, someone had leaked information to the press." "What did you tell them?" "That you were my friend, that you brought food and talked to me, but they kept asking strange things, as if you were a bad person." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're not a bad person, are you?" "No, honey, I'm not." He hugged her protectively, but his mind was already working on the implications. If the press had found out, it was a matter of time before the story became public. And once in the media, all his privacy, and hers, would be destroyed. "Listen," he said, pulling away to look into her eyes. "Maybe it's better if you don't stay here anymore. I can arrange a safe place for you to stay." "Are you going to abandon me too?" The question came out as a broken whisper. "No, I'm never going to abandon you. But other people may try to separate us if they find out about our friendship. I need to find a way to protect you officially. But protecting her officially would mean publicly exposing his relationship with her. And that, he knew, would be the beginning of a battle that would test not only his determination, but also his ability to put her well-being above his own reputation. The millionaire spent the entire night awake, pacing back and forth in his luxurious penthouse, weighing his options. By morning, he had made a decision that would change his life forever. It was time to find out the truth once and for all. He called his private doctor and requested a discreet DNA test. "I need it processed with maximum urgency and discretion," he instructed the professional, "and I want the results delivered personally to me, without copies." When he arrived at the alley that morning, he found the girl quieter than usual. She played distractedly with a piece of string, lost in thoughts that seemed too heavy for her age. "Good morning, sweetheart," he greeted, noticing that she didn't run to hug him as had become custom. "Good morning," she replied, without looking. "What's wrong? You're different today." She finally looked up and he saw tears contained in her eyes. "I dreamed about my mom last night. She was calling me, said it was time to go with her." His heart tightened. "It was just a dream, honey. Your mom wants you to stay here, to be happy." "How do you know?" The question came out loaded with a deep sadness. "Sometimes I think it would be easier to be with her than to stay here alone." He knelt down in front of her, gently holding her small, dirty hands. "You're not alone. I'm here, and I'm not going to leave you alone anymore." "But what if the bad people manage to separate us? What if you find out that I'm not important enough?" The question hit him like a punch to the stomach. How could such a small child carry such a sense of inadequacy? "Listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you," he said in a firm voice. "You are the most important person in the world to me. Now, and I'm going to prove it." "How?" He took a deep breath, knowing he was about to cross an irreversible line. "Because I'm almost certain that you're my daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. The girl blinked several times, processing the words. You're my dad? I loved your mother very much years ago, but our families separated us before I even knew you existed." The words came out with difficulty, laden with years of guilt and regret. If I had known that you needed me, why didn't you come back to look for her?" The simple question carried a devastating accusation. How to explain the cowardice, the submission to family pressures, the ease with which he had allowed himself to be convinced that Elena was inadequate for someone of his social standing? "Because I was a coward," he admitted, with an honesty that hurt. "Because I let other people decide my life, and that was the biggest mistake I ever made." The girl studied his face for long moments. "My mom always said that my dad would come, back when he found out about me. She never stopped waiting." Those words were like knives in his heart. Elena had waited. She had believed until the end that he would return, and she had died waiting, alone in a public hospital, while he lived in his ivory tower. "Let's do a test," he said, taking out a collection kit he had brought. "To be sure. Do you want to know the truth too?" She nodded, allowing him to collect a saliva sample. The process was quick, but the emotional weight was immense. In a few days, they would have scientific confirmation of what their hearts already knew. 2 days later, the phone rang in his office. It was the doctor with the results. "The results are positive with 99.7% certainty," said the voice on the other end of the line. "Congratulations, you're a father." He hung up the phone and sat in silence for several minutes. Father. At 42, he had discovered that he was the father of a 7-year-old girl who lived on the streets. The irony was cruel. He, who had dedicated his entire life to building a business legacy, discovered that his true legacy was abandoned in a smelly alley. When he arrived at the alley that afternoon, he brought the envelope with the results. The girl, his daughter, ran to hug him, as she always did. "I brought the result," he said, showing the envelope. "And what does it say?" He knelt down, to her height, looking directly into her eyes, Elena's eyes, but also his eyes. "It says that you're my daughter, that I'm your dad." For a moment, she was completely still. Then tears began to roll down her dirty cheeks. "Really? Really? Does that mean I won't be alone anymore?" "Never again," he promised, hugging her tightly. "You'll never be alone again." But while they hugged, celebrating the discovery that would change their lives forever, neither of them noticed the camera with a telephoto lens hidden in the building across the street, capturing every intimate moment. The battle for their happiness was just beginning. The next morning, the millionaire woke up with a strange sense of completeness that he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in decades, there was a real reason to get out of bed. A small person who depended on him, who loved him unconditionally. But his peace would be shattered before breakfast. The phone rang insistently at 6 in the morning. It was his press agent, his voice altered by panic. "Mr. Sterling, we need to talk urgently. Don't turn on the television, don't access the internet, and don't answer any calls until I get there." What happened? The press found out about the girl. "There are photos, there are speculations. They're saying that you're involved in something inappropriate with a minor." His blood ran cold. "That's ridiculous. She's my daughter." "I know, sir, but they don't know that." What they see is a single millionaire secretly visiting a street girl. The interpretations are being the worst possible. 20 minutes later, his agent arrived at the penthouse carrying newspapers and a tablet. The headlines were devastating. Millionaire in suspicious encounters with street miner. Sex scandal shakes business empire. Wealthy businessman caught in compromising situation. The photos were even worse. Images of him hugging the girl, kneeling in front of her, talking intimately. Out of context, they really looked suspicious to anyone who didn't know the truth. "How did they get this?" he asked, anger growing in his chest. "Probably someone from the company leaked your location. There are people interested in harming you, especially now that the company's stock is on the rise." "And what do we do?" "Ideally, you should stay away from the girl temporarily until the situation cools down. Then we can think of a more appropriate humanitarian aid strategy." "No." The answer came firm and immediate. "I'm not going to abandon my daughter." "Your daughter?" The agent looked confused. "She's my biological daughter. I have the tests that prove it." The man was silent for a few seconds, recalculating the situation. That changes everything. If it's true, this becomes a family reunion story, not a sex scandal. Then let's make it public. It's not that simple. We need a careful strategy. And first, we need to protect the girl. If she really is your daughter, she's in danger now. As if it were a prophecy, the phone rang again. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Is this the father of the alley girl?" The voice was female, professional, with a tone he didn't like. "Who's speaking?" "Dr. Beatrice Mendez from Child Protective Services. We received reports about a minor in a risky situation being visited by an unknown adult. We're going to the location now to take the child." "Wait," he shouted, but the call had already ended. "They're going to take my daughter," he said to the agent, who paled. "If she goes into the system now, with all this controversy in the media, it can be very difficult to get her back. Do you have any documents that prove paternity?" "Only the DNA test, but I don't know if it's enough." "It's not. For legal purposes, you need to file a paternity suit which can take months." The millionaire ran to the car, instructing the driver to go to downtown as quickly as possible. His heart beat erratically as he imagined his daughter being taken by strangers without understanding what was happening. When they arrived at the alley, the scene was chaotic. A Child Protective Services van was parked at the entrance, surrounded by journalists with cameras and microphones. Social workers were trying to convince the girl to come out of her hiding place, while she screamed and refused to cooperate. "I'm not going. My dad is coming to get me. He promised he wouldn't leave." "Me alone?" "Honey, that man isn't your dad," said a woman in a lab coat. "He was deceiving you. You need to come with us to a safe place." "He is my dad! He loves me!" The millionaire got out of the car and was immediately surrounded by reporters. "Is it true that you were having secret encounters with the minor? What's your relationship with the child? Do you admit that your behavior was inappropriate?" He pushed people aside, trying to get to his daughter. "Get out of the way. She's my daughter." "Daddy!" The girl screamed when she saw him, trying to run towards him, but she was restrained by the social worker. "Sir, you can't approach the minor," said Dr. Beatrice, placing herself between them. "There's an investigation underway. She's my biological daughter. I have tests that prove it. Even if that's true, you don't have legal custody of her. Until the situation is clarified in court, she will remain under state protection." "No, Daddy, don't let them take me," the girl cried desperately, reaching out to him. "I'm going to get you, sweetheart. Daddy's gonna get you, I promise." But his promises were lost in the noise of clicking cameras and reporters shouting questions. He watched, helpless, as they carried his daughter into the van. The last thing he saw were her terrified eyes through the rear window of the vehicle, begging him to keep his promise. As the van disappeared into traffic, He remained standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by bloodthirsty journalists, feeling like he had lost the only thing that really mattered in his life. The following days were the darkest of the millionaire's life. His image was destroyed in the media, his businesses suffered from the scandal, and most importantly, he didn't know where his daughter was or how she was being treated. The legal system moved with a frustrating slowness that drove him to the brink of madness. He hired the best team of lawyers in the city, specialists in family law and paternity cases. The office was transformed into a central operations hub, with piles of documents, certificates, medical exams, and legal petitions covering every available surface. "The paternity suit can take 3 to 6 months," explained his lead attorney, "and even then there are complications. The fact that the minor has lived on the streets for months can be used against you." "How so?" "They can argue that you were aware of her existence and chose not to intervene. This could be interpreted as negligence or abandonment." "But I didn't know she existed." "We know that, but proving it will be complicated. We need evidence to corroborate your version of the facts." While the lawyers worked on the legal aspects, he faced a war on several fronts. The media continued to speculate about his motivations, some outlets insinuating that it was all just a desperate attempt to clean up his image after being caught in a suspicious situation. But the worst blow came from within his own company. During an emergency meeting of the board of directors, his majority partner, Edward Castillo, made a proposal that left him stunned. "We need to cut ties with this whole situation," said Edward, with the calculating coldness that had always characterized him. "I suggest that you temporarily step down from the presidency of the company while you resolve your personal issues." "You're firing me? I'm protecting our investors. Our shares have fallen 15% since the scandal broke. Major clients are canceling contracts. We can't allow personal problems to destroy what it took us years to build." "Personal problems?" His anger exploded. "I'm fighting to get my daughter back. A daughter you didn't even know existed until last week. A daughter who may not even be yours, considering the type of woman you were involved with." The millionaire stood up abruptly, his fists clenched. "Don't you dare talk about Elena like that. Elena, the same Elena that you yourself said your family considered inadequate? The same one who disappeared from your life 8 years ago? How can you be sure that this child is really yours?" "Because I did the DNA test. Tests can be falsified, and even if she is your daughter, that doesn't change the fact that your obsession with this situation is hurting all of us." The meeting ended with him being formally removed from the presidency until the situation is resolved satisfactorily. 20 years building that empire, and in 1 week he had lost everything. The company, the reputation, and most importantly, his daughter. That night, alone in his penthouse, he did something he hadn't done in decades. He cried for Eleanor, who had died waiting for him. He cried for the daughter who was scared in some shelter, not understanding why the father who had promised to protect her had disappeared. He cried for all the lost years, for all the wrong decisions, for being a coward when he should have been brave. But when he finished crying, something changed inside him. The pain turned into determination. For the first time in his life, he had a purpose greater than money or business success. He had a daughter to rescue and a promise to keep. The next day, he made a radical decision. He sold part of his personal shares in the company and used the money to hire the best private investigators in the country. If the legal system was slow, he would create his own system. "I want to know everything about Elena Santos," he instructed. "The team of investigators, where she lived, where she worked, who knew about our relationship. I want documentary evidence that our daughter was born 9 months after we separated. I want witnesses who can confirm that Elena talked about me. In parallel, he used his contacts, those who were still willing to help him, to find out where his daughter was being held. The information came through a former colleague whose son worked in the child protection system. "She's at St. Francis Home in the north side," he said discreetly, "but she's not adapting well. She refuses to talk to the psychologist, doesn't eat right, cries for her father every night." "Can I see her?" "Officially, no, but there's a park in front of the shelter where the children play in the afternoons. You can watch from afar just to make sure she's okay." The next day, he was standing in the park, pretending to read a newspaper while watching the gate of the shelter. When the children came out for recess, his heart almost stopped. There she was, thinner than before, wearing clean but standardized clothes from the shelter, sitting alone on a bench while other children played. Even from a distance, he could see that she wasn't doing well. Her small shoulders were slumped in defeat, her eyes constantly scanning the street as if she still expected him to appear to keep his promise. At that moment, he made the most important decision of his life. It didn't matter how much it cost, how long it took, or how many people he had to face. He was going to bring his daughter home, and this time no one, not the media, not his former partners, not the legal system, would be able to separate them again. 3 weeks after being forcibly separated from his daughter, the millionaire had transformed into a different man. The obsession with profits and status had been replaced by an iron determination to reunite his family. He worked 18 hours a day, coordinating a complex operation that involved lawyers, investigators, media specialists, and even a former investigative journalist who had decided to help him tell his side of the story. The first victory came through Helen, a retired nurse who had worked at the hospital where Eleanor died. The investigation located her in a distant neighborhood where she lived modestly on her pension. "Of course I remember Eleanor," she said with tears in her eyes as the investigators recorded her testimony. "Such a sweet girl, so polite, even going through so much suffering. She talked about the father of her daughter all the time, said he was an important businessman, that he had a birthmark on his neck shaped like a moon." The millionaire instinctively touched the mark on his neck, something that few people knew existed, always hidden by the collars of his dress shirts. She showed a picture of him to everyone who wanted to see it. She kept it in her wallet like it was a treasure. Even at the end, when she was very debilitated, she asked if anyone could find him to tell him about the girl. "Do you know what happened to her belongings? Everything was thrown away by the hospital when she died. It was institution policy. But I kept her wallet." Helen disappeared into the room and returned with a worn, synthetic leather wallet. "I thought it might be important someday." Inside the wallet, in addition to some personal documents, there was a faded photo. It was a picture of him at 34, smiling genuinely, something he rarely did lately, with Elena beside him. On the back, in her delicate handwriting, was written, "My love, father of my daughter, March 15th, 2017. The date was perfect, exactly 9 months before the girl's birth. Armed with this and other evidence collected by the investigators, his lawyers filed an emergency petition with the court. Simultaneously, the investigative journalist he had hired published a complete report telling the true story. A businessman who had lost the love of his life due to family pressures and discovered, 8 years later, that he had a daughter living on the streets. The repercussion was immediate and completely different from the first wave of news. Public opinion began to divide, and many began to see the situation as a story of love and redemption instead of a sordid scandal. But the most important victory came from an unexpected source. Mary, a cleaning lady who worked in the building of his former company, approached his lawyers with explosive information. "I saw everything," she said, nervous but determined. "I heard Mr. Castillo talking on the phone with a journalist, paying for the photos of the boss with the girl. He wanted to destroy his reputation to take over the company alone. Do you..." Have proof of this? I have the number he called written down here, and I know the exact day and time. And more, I heard him talking to the doctor from Child Protective Services, saying that if she made the situation difficult, he would make a generous donation to her institution. With this information, the picture became clear. Edward had orchestrated the entire scandal to get rid of his partner and take total control of the company. He had bribed journalists to create a negative narrative and even influenced the authorities responsible for the girl's protection. The legal turnaround was quick. Edward was indicted for conspiracy and bribery. Child Protective Services was forced to review the case under new supervision, and a court injunction granted the millionaire the right to supervised visits while the paternity suit ran on an emergency basis. On the day scheduled for the first visit, he arrived at the shelter with his hands trembling with anxiety. He didn't know how she would react after weeks of separation, if she would still trust him after he had broken his promise not to abandon her. She entered the visiting room, accompanied by a social worker. She was thinner, paler, but when she saw him, her eyes lit up like suns. "Daddy!" she shouted, running into his arms. "My daughter," he whispered, hugging her tightly, feeling like a part torn from his soul had returned to its place. "Daddy's here. Daddy came to get you." "I knew you were coming back," she said, crying and laughing at the same time. "I told everyone that my dad was going to get me, but they didn't believe me. And I came, and now no one will be able to separate us anymore." "Promise." "I promise," he said, looking directly into her eyes. And this time, he was absolutely sure that he would keep that promise. The social worker watched the interaction with tears in her own eyes. It was impossible to deny the genuine bond between them, the pure and unconditional love that emanated from both sides. "The final hearing will be next week," she informed him. "If everything goes as we expect, she can go home with you." Home. The word sounded strange in his ears. His luxurious penthouse had never really been a home. But now, with her there, he finally understood what it meant to have a real home. 6 months after the hearing that formalized his permanent custody, the millionaire watched his daughter play in the garden of the new house they had bought together. A house smaller than his previous penthouse, but infinitely warmer. She had insisted on choosing a house with a large backyard to plant flowers like Mom used to plant, and he had discovered that denying her anything was simply impossible. The transformation in their lives had been radical. He had sold the penthouse and unnecessary properties, opting for a simpler life but infinitely richer in meaning. He had regained control of his company after Edward was convicted, but now he ran the business completely differently, with hours that allowed him to be present in his daughter's life, with business policies that prioritized social responsibility, and with the perspective of someone who finally understood that success without purpose is nothing more than an empty illusion. The girl, who had chosen to keep the name by which Elena called her simply Love, had adapted to her new life with the impressive resilience of children. She was enrolled in a private school where she flourished academically, made friends easily, and demonstrated a surprising emotional intelligence that constantly taught valuable lessons to her father. "Daddy, come see!" she shouted from the garden, interrupting his thoughts. "Mum's rose bush is sprouting!" He walked to where she was kneeling next to a small green shoot that was beginning to emerge from the earth. Months before, she had asked to plant roses in the garden so Mum could visit. He initially thought it was just childish fantasy, but now he understood that it was her way of keeping Elena present in their lives. "It's growing strong," he observed, kneeling beside his daughter. "Just like you." "Do you think Mom knows that? We found each other?" The question, asked with the touching seriousness of children, moved him as it always did when she spoke about Elena. "I'm sure she knows, and I'm sure she's very happy. Sometimes I still dream about her, Love confessed, focused on carefully watering the sprout. But now they're happy dreams. She smiles and says she can rest because you're taking care of me. He swallowed the lump in his throat. Even after all these months, talking about Elena still deeply moved him. There were days when he felt overwhelming guilt for not having been present during the difficult times, but love had taught him that regret was only valuable if it was transformed into positive action in the present. "Daddy," she said, putting down the watering can and looking at him with her eyes that were a perfect blend of his and Elena's. "Can I ask you a question?" "You can always ask." "Why did it take you so long to find me?" It was a question she had never asked directly, and he had been preparing for this moment for months. He decided that she deserved the truth, appropriate for her age, but the whole truth. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "When your mom and I loved each other, other people said that our love was wrong, that we were too different, and instead of fighting for her, instead of being brave, let them separate us. But did you really love each other? More than anything in the world, your mom was the great love of my life. And me? You are the proof of that love. You are the best part of me and your mom together." He gently touched her face. "And you taught me that it's never too late to be brave." Love smiled, satisfied with the answer. "So now we're a real family, the truest family that ever existed." That night, after putting her to bed and listening to her prayers, which always included a special thanks for having found each other, he sat on the porch, watching the stars. His life had changed completely. Where before there was emptiness, now there was purpose. Where before there was loneliness, now there was unconditional love. Where before there was only material ambition, now there was genuine hope and joy. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his new social worker, who made periodic check-ins to ensure that everything was going well. "How are things going over there?" she asked, with the affection she had developed for both of them during the process. "Perfect," he replied, and he really meant it. "She's doing great in school, made several friends, and yesterday asked me if we could adopt a puppy." "And what did you answer?" He laughed. "That we're going to the shelter on Saturday." "You've changed a lot since we met," she observed. "In the beginning you seemed desperate, almost lost. Now you seem complete." She was right. He had found himself in the process of finding his daughter. He had discovered that being a father was infinitely more rewarding than being a CEO, that making a child smile was worth more than closing any multi-million-dollar deal, that true love was the only wealth that really mattered. After hanging up the phone, he checked if Love was sleeping soundly before heading to the small altar they had set up in her room. A photo of Eleanor, surrounded by candles and fresh flowers. "Thank you," he whispered to the photo. "Thank you for having raised this wonderful girl, for having believed that I would return, for having given me the chance to be a father. I promise that I will love and protect her for the rest of my life. I promise that I will be the man you always knew I could be." A gentle breeze entered through the window, causing the candles to flicker for a moment, as if Elena was responding. He smiled, feeling a deep peace take over his heart. The next morning, Love woke up humming a song that Elena used to sing to her. She went down to the kitchen where she found her father preparing pancakes, a culinary skill he had developed especially to please her. "Good morning, Daddy," she said, hugging him around the waist. "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well? I dreamed that we were a giant family, with you, me, Mom up in heaven, and a bunch of puppies running in the yard." He laughed, flipping a pancake in the air and managing to catch it in the pan, which always impressed her. "How about we start with just one puppy, then we'll see about the rest. Can I choose the name?" "Of course you can." While they were having breakfast, he observed how she had changed since they met. The scared and malnourished girl from the Ali had transformed into a confident, intelligent, and full-of-life child. Her eyes shone with the security of someone who knew she was loved unconditionally. "Daddy," she said, between bites of pancake covered with honey, "can I tell you something? You can always tell me everything. Sometimes I'm glad that I was alone in the alley for so long." He stopped eating, surprised. "Why?" "Because if I hadn't been there, shouting every day, maybe you never would have heard me. And then we never would have really met." The simple wisdom of the observation deeply moved him. She was right. All the suffering, all the pain, all the separation had been necessary for them to reach that perfect moment. "You're very wise for a 7-year-old, he said, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Mom always said that kids who go through hard things get wiser, but that it wasn't sad, it was a gift. Your mother was a very special woman, just like you're a very special dad." After breakfast, while she got ready for school, he stayed in the kitchen reflecting on how life had changed. A year earlier, he was completely lost in his empty existence, surrounded by luxuries but without real purpose. Now, each day had meaning. Each moment was an opportunity to build memories with his daughter. The phone rang. It was his new partner in the company, a competent woman who had helped restructure the business with a focus on social responsibility. "The donations for the Children's Shelter Project have been approved," she informed him, "and we have 3 companies interested in sponsoring the family reunification program." He smiled. He had created a foundation in Elena's name, focused on helping children in vulnerable situations and reuniting separated families. It was his way of transforming his own experience into something positive for other people. "Excellent. And the documentary? It premieres next month. We already have interest from several educational broadcasters." He had authorized a documentary to be made about his story, hoping it could inspire other parents to fight for their children and alert society to the invisible children who lived on the streets of every city. When Love came down, already uniformed and with her backpack on, he noticed that she had placed a small photo of Elena in the front pocket of her backpack. "So Mom can come with me to school," she explained, noticing that he had observed. "Good idea. She'll like to see how well you're doing." On the way to school, she spoke excitedly about the science presentation she would give that afternoon, about the new friend she had made, about the book she was reading. Each word was music to his ears. "Daddy," she said when they arrived at school. "Thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For hearing me shouting, for stopping the car, for not giving up on me even when it got hard." He knelt down to her height, as he had done that first day in the alley, but now with absolute certainty about the future. "I thank you for never stopping shouting, for having believed that I would return, for having taught me what true love is." She kissed him on the forehead and ran inside the school, waving cheerfully before disappearing down the hallways. He remained standing for a few minutes, watching the building where his daughter was learning, growing, becoming the extraordinary person he knew she would be. The contrast with that smelly alley where he had found her was immense, but he would never forget that place. It was there that his real life had begun. That afternoon, he returned to the alley one last time. Now it was just an empty space between 2 buildings, without any trace of the small house she had built. But he could still hear echoing in his memory that cry that had changed everything. "Somebody, get me out of here!" Now every morning, instead of that desperate cry, his house was filled with a different voice, full of joy and hope. "Daddy, you're here!" And he knew that this was the soundtrack he wanted to hear for the rest of his life. From the alley, he returned home, where Love was already waiting for him, with her homework done and 1,000 stories to tell about her day. There, in the modest but love-filled living room of his new home, surrounded by the laughter of his daughter and the fond memories of Eleanor, he finally understood the true meaning of wealth. Some fortunes cannot be measured in numbers. Some achievements cannot be contained in financial reports. And some cries, however desperate they may be, are actually invitations to the greatest adventure of life, learning to love truly. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special.